the essence of this work is to make sure that our professionals, also called enablers, so the banks, the financial institutions, the lawyers, the notary publics, anybody who deals with cash or property belonging to those designated individuals or companies is aware and will implement ipso jure those sanctions. So we have had in a number of instances meetings with the European federations of those professionals, and we have put pressure indeed some of those institutions so that they quickly implement those sanctions. The three subgroups that we have created first concern freezing measures, so that freezing happens as a matter of instantaneous and speedy action in all member states. The second subgroup concerns possible investigations and the ultimate confiscation of those frozen property. And the third one concerns the creation of a common fund that would be fed eventually by confiscated assets. And all three subgroups have now started working, and we are meeting, as I said, on a regular basis. We have published some figures 2 weeks ago showing that indeed the freezing and sanctions regime in general produced very impressive results. Billions of cash have been frozen by European banks and financial professionals, and vessels, like luxury jets and properties have been frozen or impounded by national authorities in the European Union. But we have to keep up the pressure so that this is happening and that we have effective abilities to trace and freeze those assets. Now, this task force indeed is very much similar to what the United States has set up, called the Russian Klepto Capture Task Force, and it is coordinated on a regular basis with the G7 task force, which also looks at the freezing of property belonging to Russian and Belarusian oligarchs and companies. The second strand of our work relates to war crimes committed in Ukraine, and Commissioner Renders is in the lead for this work, and we have worked with the member states very closely to make sure that they contribute to the investigations happening on the ground. Commissioner Renders has sent a letter to member states last week asking them to coordinate their efforts as much as possible by sending experts, including forensic experts, to Ukraine, so that the Ukrainian authorities can have special expertise in collecting evidence on the ground, and that they are trained in the best techniques of collecting such forensic evidence. The second area is providing technical assistance to the Ukrainian authorities. My commissioner received a very detailed list of items that the Ukrainian law enforcement and prosecution authorities would like to receive, and this includes issues such as equipment for secure storage of evidence, including IT storage of evidence, so a number of witness statements, videos, etc., secure communication lines, and on-the-job training for investigators. And we are coordinating this with the member states in the context of the ICPR committee in the Council. A related aspect is the amendment, an emergency amendment of the Eurojust regulation, which the Commission is about to adopt later this week, and which would enable that Eurojust can collect and store large volumes of evidence in a secure way at its platform in The Hague, where it's seated, so that it can prepare it and make it admissible for courts, including international courts that will deal with war crimes and core international crimes when time comes. You should know that Eurojust has set up and supports a joint investigation team in which several EU member states are participating specifically for the purpose of investigating and prosecuting those war crimes and other core crimes committed in Ukraine. The Ukrainian Prosecution Service has registered over 6,000 such incidents since the war has started, and this joint investigation team in which EU member states participate will help the Ukrainian authorities investigate and hopefully successfully prosecute the people responsible for those horrendous crimes. And there can be no impunity. Our objective should be that our prosecution services and courts will finish the job when time comes. And last but not least, we have a number of initiatives to financially support the Ukrainian authorities, including via our mission in Kiev. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I remain at your disposal for questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Tonka. Before I now give the floor to the representative of DG ENER, I will now first give the floor to the Vice Chair of the ITRE Committee, Zdzisław Krasnodębski. Warm welcome, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Thank you, Ahmed, for invitation. This is a really very important exchange of views. And I just would like to assure you that also ITRE Committee is fully committed in doing all to support Ukraine in the struggle against this aggression and survival. But as you probably know, we have to deal with the main problem also of the EU. That means our dependency on Russia in energy sector. And I am convinced we should strive for embargo on oil and gas from Russia as soon as possible, but we know all how controversial and difficult it is, and it probably takes a time to take the decision. I regret this. So in the meanwhile, we are trying to ensure that the EU has a tool to deal with the long-term consequences of this war, especially from the energy sector, as well for immediate disruption in energy supply. So in short term, extraordinary measures are needed to ensure security of gas supply from next winter, and to protect and support your households and industry for rising energy prices, which, as we know, leads to energy poverty, inflation. And in this regard, we will start the interinstitutional negotiation shortly on the emergency legislation on gas storage. We just started this work, and we hope that we will be very quickly in it. But we also want to guarantee that the long-term measures are properly reflected upon and built from the experience of the past 10 years, but also from the experience of the coming months. The current internet market for gas package remains the centerpiece for our long-term measure for decarbonize the gas sector and increase diversification. And there are such sources as hydrogen, biomethane, as well as natural gas, facilitate market entrance and promote interconnection and reverse flows. The goal is ultimately reduction of our future vulnerability to external shock. I would also, and the ITRE Committee would also like to underline the key role played recently by the European Network of Transmission System Operators for Electricity in successfully carrying out the energy synchronization of Ukraine and Moldovan power grid with ours. It was done thanks to extraordinary efforts by those involved that rose to the challenge of the times. And important is that there is a continuous support showed by bordering member states to ensure gas flowing eastwards to Ukraine provided a third of its gas needs. And this should be also be acknowledged and commended. We remain deep concerned about dramatic increase in energy prices within the Union. in light of the recent events, it is now clear that when the prices are high and demand does not decrease, something suspicious is going on. We might have been too naive to see what was being communicated to us last year, when one could observe that Gazprom's lack of marked response to our energy demand needs. So ITRE continues to put the spotlight on this matter. Let us not make such mistake in the future. And finally, ITRE is looking forward to REPowerEU plan by the end of May, together with the communication of energy foreign relation with the Gulf. We expect concrete proposal to enact swiftly if we are to reduce our dependency from Russia's fossil fuels. It is a part of a very big package of measures to enhance a triple diversification that remains the ultimate solution to energy security and independence in the EU. That means the sources of energy, of suppliers, and of supply routes. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Krasnodębski. And now I give the floor to Mr. Ivo Schmidt. He's the Deputy Head of the Unit Energy Policy, Strategy and Coordination, Economic Analysis and Foresight Recovery in DG ENER. The floor is yours for maximum 7 minutes.
Mr. Schmidt, could you please press on the speak button?
So thank you very much for giving me the floor and giving me the opportunity to respond to the comments of the Vice Chair of ITRE and to the topic that you've announced today for energy. As we all know, energy is a crucial part of revenues for Russia, and hence energy has been part of the various packages of sanctions that the Commission has proposed so far and that the Council has adopted. Let me first start by, of course, underlining the importance of REPowerEU and the overall drive and ambition now set out in those communications to reduce or even get rid of our dependency of energy from Russia in the medium term. And at the same time, we're also working very hard on the short-term measures to make sure that for the next winter we are prepared. And Mr. Krasnodębski has already mentioned the various initiatives that are underway and that are being set in place to prepare for next winter and make sure we have enough energy and we'll be able to protect our households accordingly. At this stage and today, of course, I cannot elaborate on any future potential sanctions targeting fossil fuels, but I can give you a quick overview of what has been put in place so far. So firstly, as part of the second package, and this was immediately adopted after the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, is the oil refining and liquefaction of natural gas technologies. The EU prohibited, in fact, the sale, the supply, the transfer, and the export to Russia of specific goods and technologies in oil refining, and also banned the provision of related services in Russia. With this export ban, the impact we intended to have was to hit the Russian oil sector and make it impossible in the medium to long term for Russia to upgrade its oil refineries. As we know, Russia's refined oil products export revenues account for around 60 billion euros to the EU in 2019 and around 24 billion euros to the EU in the year afterwards. As of 8th of April, this ban on oil liquefaction technologies has been extended to also cover the liquefaction of natural gas technologies. Of course, it's rather difficult to really assess the exact impact of this ban, because we know that certain EU technologies can be substituted by other technologies, either Russian-made or Chinese domestic or Chinese technologies. So the impact there still remains to be seen. But the impact on European refining technologies manufacturers, at least from what we hear from them, is actually rather limited at this stage. The second set of sanctions was on new investments in the Russian energy sector and also on export restrictions on equipment and technology and services for the energy industry. This was part of the fourth package of the EU on sanctions, which was adopted already on 15th of March. where the EU introduced a far-reaching ban on new investment across Russian energy sector, as well as a comprehensive export restriction on equipment, technology and services for the energy industry. Civil nuclear energy has been excluded from the scope of these sanctions. And the aim of these sanctions is to undermine the financial viability of Russian energy companies and also the Russian energy sector. So far, the impact, according to Moody's and other credit rating agency, has been basically the downgrading of close to 100 Russian companies, including most of, if not all, the energy companies concerned. The third part of the third measure of energy sanctions basically is coal, so it's coal imports from Russia to the EU, and this has been part of the fifth sanctions package, which was adopted on the 8th of April. And the EU banned the purchase, the import or the transfer of coal or any other solid fossil fuel into the EU if they originate from Russia or exported from Russia as of August, as was mentioned by my colleague from DG Move. The impact of this measure is that basically it affects 1/4 of all Russian coal exports, which amounts to around 8 billion euros of loss of revenues per year for Russia. So to conclude, I can just add that our President von der Leyen has announced already that as part of the sixth package of sanctions, the oil is being considered, of course, but it's too early for me to discuss any details of that or any modalities, because as the President said, we have to find the best way to create these sanctions, and so to avoid that they actually lead to any increase in revenues on the Russian side, and see the exact modalities for that. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Schmidt. So these were all our guest speakers I invited today. So we have good facts and knowledge about where we stand. We now have, colleagues, about an hour's time to discuss what we have heard. And I will now give the floor to our members. And the floor goes to the AFET Standing Rapporteur on Ukraine, Mr. Michael Gahler. For 2 minutes, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, David. I don't know whether you can see me. I don't see the camera open.
Michael, we can hear you, but we can't see you. Can you turn the camera on?
I'm just looking. Yeah, there we are.
No, we still...
No, that's not, but then I will speak. Thank you for all the input. For me, as the outrageous Russian aggression and war is ongoing, we need to do our utmost and continue our utmost to get it stopped and shortened. And there are the different areas that need to be addressed. They have been addressed here. For me, politically, the timeline is most important. For the sanctions, for the timeline on imposing the oil embargo, there I to precisely know where we stand in the negotiations with the members. So because oil is the revenue that brings most income to Russia, and therefore we have to work on that particularly and quickly. So where do we stand? When can we expect the imposition thereof? On the weapons deliveries, I think we need to be very pushy from our parliament side to all the governments concerned. And as a German, I'm of course particularly insisting on the German government to deliver what can be delivered, and not to find money available, but the weapons available to get it as quickly as possible further to the on the ground in Ukraine. My question to the External Action Service is, as I just read that Charles Michel is in Kiev as we speak, what can you tell us about that? What are the concrete things that he delivers there? So where do we stand also with regard to the third tranche of the European Peace Facility? Is that the thing that he explains there? These are things that are of interest to me as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Michael Gahler. And now we can start with the representatives according to the political groups. For the EPP, it's first Sandra Kalniete.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. May I ask you to put on your headphones because this will be the rare occasion I will speak in Latvian. Vispirms es gribētu uzsvērt, ka Ukraina ir un būs piederīga Eiropai. Un tāpēc mums ir jāatbalsta kandidātu valsts status piešķiršana Ukrainai un pātrināt uzņemšanas procedūru. To Eiropa ir parādā varonīgai Ukraiņu tautai par cīņu ar Krievijas agresoru. Kauja par Donbasu ir sākusies, un katram un ikvienam Eiropietim ir jāsaprot, ka Ukraina šajā karā nedrīkst zaudēt, jo Krievijas uzvara nozīmēs arī Eiropas sakāvi. Un tāpēc nākamās nedēļas būs izšķirošas kara iznākumam, un Ukraiņiem munīcija, pretgaisa aizsardzības sistēmas, tanki, bruņu transporti ir vajadzīgi tūlīt, lai apturētu un atsistu Krievu karapūļu uzbrukumus. Mums ir jādara viss, lai pastiprinātu sankcijas pret Krieviju, bet nemazāk svarīgi ir tas, lai sankcijas, par kurām lēmums jau ir pieņemts, dalību valstis ieviestu, jo šobrīd Eiropā nav priekšstata par to, kurās dalību valstīs kādi logi sankcijās ir rastāti un kāpēc sankcijas nav pilnībā ieviestas. Karš Ukrainā ir mūsu karš, un tāpēc ir jāpārtrauc pirkt Krievijas gāze, nafta un ogles. Par to ir daudz runāts. Un ja arī tāpēc mums nāksies atteikties no dažām ierastajām dzīves vērtībām, taču atšķirībā no Ukraiņiem mēs esam patvērumā, nemaksājam ar savu dzīvību, nestiepjamies pagrabos un nebēgam no savām mājām. Mūsu atbalsts atsakoties no dažām dzīves vērtībām, ir vismazākā cena, ko mēs varam maksāt par palīdzību Ukrainai. Paldies!
Thank you, Sandra Kalniete. Now I give the floor to Tonino Pizzula for the S&D Group.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to all speakers. I wish to clearly express the support of my group and myself personally for the incredible efforts of the Ukrainian people in defending their country. I come from Croatia, and we understood the Ukrainian mission to defend their country too well. We need to bolster our military equipment production and delivery to Ukraine to support heroic resistance. My question: how are we addressing the challenges of insufficient delivery of military assistance? This House welcomed the proposed package of sanctions so far, but we also overwhelmingly called to be stronger and move beyond it. The question: European Parliament, in its resolution of April 7th, called for an embargo on Russian imports of coal, gas and oil. Which are the next steps that our Commission is planning to propose? Lastly, Commission and the European Union supervisory authorities shall closely monitor all Member States' comprehensive implementation of all EU sanctions and share these data. By the Member States, and which challenges could be observed? Is there an intention to share the data on implementation of the Member States? What would be the most important measure to take that would substantially increase the effectiveness of the sanctions already in place? To conclude, democracy costs, and Ukrainians know it too well these days as they pay the highest price. We, as the EU, cannot escape our responsibility, our commitments, and our credibility. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Tonino. For the Renew Group, Nathalie Loiseau, please.
Merci, Monsieur le Président, et merci à tous les experts qui sont venus ce matin pour nous partager des informations. J'ai peut-être un regret, c'est que cette session ne soit pas in camera, parce que j'aurais beaucoup de questions similaires à celles de mes collègues, mais je comprends très bien qu'il puisse être difficile aux experts de répondre dans une séance publique. Je voudrais commencer évidemment en disant que, compte tenu de la situation sur le terrain en Ukraine, nous devons être déterminés à faire beaucoup plus que ce que nous faisons déjà et ne certainement pas nous satisfaire des efforts que nous avons faits, parce que nos efforts nous maintiennent dans un grand confort, là où l'Ukraine se bat non seulement pour sa liberté, mais pour la nôtre. Sur les différents éléments qui ont été abordés, sur la question de la lutte contre les crimes de guerre et les crimes contre l'humanité. Nous étions plusieurs à être la semaine dernière à Kiev, mais aussi à Boutcha. Donc j'ai entendu parler en termes de crimes de guerre, de bombardements d'hôpitaux et d'écoles, mais il faut nommer les choses telles que nous en avons eu le récit. Des viols à mort, des tortures, des exécutions, des enfants massacrés. J'ai entendu que, en réalité, nous demandions aux États membres de coordonner leurs efforts. C'est évidemment nécessaire. Que nous faisions évoluer Eurojust, et c'est souhaitable. Je voulais aussi savoir ce que nous faisions avec l'ancienne mission de l'Union européenne en Ukraine, l'EU-AM, qui a proposé de travailler avec des experts de la documentation des crimes de guerre. Est-ce que nous lui avons donné les moyens en personnel et en crédit de faire cette mission, puisqu'elle connaît bien les autorités ukrainiennes concernées, le parquet et les services de sécurité. Sur la question de l'énergie, je crois que nous sommes nombreux dans cette pièce à considérer qu'il y a urgence à décider d'un embargo sur le pétrole. Nous sommes nombreux dans cette pièce, mais malheureusement, certains États membres sont réticents. Est-ce qu'il y a des études de la Commission sur l'impact de cet embargo? Est-ce que la Commission travaille à des mesures de compensation pour les États membres qui seraient les plus directement visés par les conséquences de cet embargo, pour qu'on puisse enfin sortir d'une discussion qui paraît stérile et arrêter de perdre du temps? Qu'est-ce qu'on peut nous dire aussi du côté du SEAE sur les efforts qui sont faits pour convaincre davantage de pays non membres de l'Union européenne d'appliquer les sanctions, ou en tout cas de ne pas faire le contraire? Et je pense en particulier aux pays candidats à l'accession à l'Union européenne. Nous avons entendu parler du gel des avoirs. J'aimerais savoir si nous pouvons avoir au moins le montant total des avoirs qui ont été gelés. Et j'ai cru comprendre dans ce que disait l'expert qu'il y avait des réticences de certains États membres. Est-ce qu'on peut en savoir davantage? Et puis enfin, sur l'aide militaire, je voudrais d'abord saluer l'action de Joseph Borrell et savoir si nous sommes déterminés à faire encore plus et plus vite. Merci.
Thank you. I have no request for Greens. Yes, Reinhard Bütikofer.
Thank you, Chair. Thanks also to the colleagues from other committees and to the experts from the EEAS and the Commission. I believe that time is of the essence. And whatever we do, we not just have to do the right thing, we have to do the right thing fast. And we're not doing enough in that regard. That's why I believe that in the sixth sanctions package that is being developed, we must close existing loopholes. We must, for instance, include Sberbank in the list of banks that are de-SWIFTed, and we must include an oil embargo, not for somewhere in the mid-term or in the distant future, but immediately. I believe that at the same time, we have to move forward, and some of our member states have to be applauded for already doing that, like many member states in the east and southeast of Europe, but others have to be criticized, like my own, in not doing enough in supplying Ukraine with the arms they need, in particular heavy armament. And this parliament should pressure all member states' governments towards not hesitating anymore in that regard. I have three more short points. One is, I believe that the EEAS should work intensely with such international partners that have not joined with us in the United Nations General Assembly, in particular with regard to the food security issues that might hit them, in order to include them into the international front. Second, candidate countries to the EU should be clearly understanding that we expect of them that they join the sanctions regime. And I have one country particularly in mind that just had an election where this is not the case, and we should put pressure there. And we should, of course, make sure that Ukraine will be granted candidate status before this summer. And finally, as regards circumvention, I think we should have taken note of the fact that China is clearly in the Russian camp in this conflict. And we should set up a mechanism of cooperation with the UK, the US, Japan, and possibly others to work together to find out about possible Chinese circumvention of our sanctions, because that is something that we must reckon with. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I give the floor to the next speaker from the ID group, let me very, very warmly welcome Mr. Ivan Fedorov, the recently released mayor of the southern Ukrainian city of Melitopol. A warm welcome to you, Ivan. Some of us got to know you during our AFET-SEDE delegation trip to your great country end of January. And I would also like to welcome a member of the Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine, Ms. Maria Mentseva. Also a warm welcome. Colleagues, I will give our Ukrainian guests the floor at a later stage. First, we continue with our exchange of views, and the next is Ms. Ceccardi for the ID Group.
Thank you, Chair. Nel recente intervento alla Duma, la governatrice della Banca Centrale Russa ha affermato che le sanzioni alla Russia avranno ora un impatto più forte sull'economia russa e che il periodo in cui l'economia possa vivere sulle scorte è limitato. E le sue parole sono state contestate duramente da Putin, che anzi ha dichiarato come il tentativo di far collassare l'economia russa sia fallito, perché la Russia ha comunque resistito alle pressioni economiche. Questa notizia conferma che senza dubbio il pacchetto di sanzioni finora adottato ha ripercussioni importanti sul governo di Mosca, così però come sulle economie dei paesi che hanno più relazioni commerciali con la Russia. La situazione in Ucraina, inoltre, ha determinato un aumento della tensione sui mercati finanziari, un rialzo importante dell'inflazione e un aumento generalizzato sui beni legati alla catena alimentare ed energetica, con un aggravio considerevole per i cittadini. Non a caso Kristalina Georgieva, direttrice operativa del Fondo Monetario Internazionale, ha confermato che la guerra in Ucraina mina la ripresa globale, rallentando la crescita economica nella maggior parte dei paesi del mondo. A fronte di questo volevo chiedere agli esponenti dell'EDG alcune domande. Al momento attuale solo il 20% degli stati del mondo hanno deciso di applicare sanzioni alla Russia, così che la Russia, senza una condanna unanime, è libera di costruire nuove relazioni commerciali con i paesi che non hanno aderito alle sanzioni. Qual è l'autonomia economica delle riserve russe per le sanzioni europee? Avete fatto una stima? È plausibile che la Russia possa bypassare le sanzioni europee stringendo nuovi contratti con altri paesi? Oltretutto il conflitto in Ucraina si sta trascinando grazie alla valorosa resistenza ucraina. Però le conseguenze delle sanzioni avranno un impatto notevole sui paesi europei che hanno importanti scambi commerciali con la Russia. Quali sono le misure fondamentali e più importanti che la Commissione europea ha pensato per aiutare le nostre imprese che saranno penalizzate dalle controsanzioni. In quanto tempo, a proposito dell'autonomia energetica, l'Europa potrà diventare più indipendente dalle fonti energetiche russe? E quali sono i principali interlocutori internazionali con i quali si tenterà di instaurare un rapporto di collaborazione finalizzato a creare nuove partnership? Grazie.
Thank you, Ms. Ciccardi. Next, for the ECR group, I give the floor to Hermann Tert. Mr. Tert.
Mr. Tert, you can press on the speak button once, please.
Yes. Hello. Yes. As I say, thank you, Mr. President. Estamos viendo cómo esa invasión brutal por parte de Rusia no está recibiendo la respuesta adecuada por parte de los países más fuertes y que más podrían hacerlo por parte de la Unión Europea. Estamos viendo cómo en Alemania hay un auténtico conflicto interno porque la resistencia dentro del gobierno a hacer las ayudas que necesita, a suministrar las ayudas que necesita Ucrania es patente y latente. Estamos viendo cómo se resiste el canciller, cómo hay otras presiones externas. ¿Qué posibilidades tenemos realmente de buscar una cohesión, una presión para que estos que están retrasando los necesarios suministros de armamento pesado para que se defienda Ucrania ante esta salvaje invasión, para que esos apoyos lleguen como deben llegar y como debiera ser deber de todos los países de la Unión Europea? Gracias.
Thank you, Mr. Tert. For the GUI Group, Mr. Pineda, please.
Gracias, presidente. Nosotros nos opusimos a las sanciones. Nos opusimos a las sanciones por varios motivos que, si tengo tiempo, explicaré. Pero lo que es evidente es que las sanciones no son un mecanismo acertado para evitar ni para solucionar los conflictos. La Unión Europea está imponiendo unas sanciones a Rusia que están pagando los ciudadanos de la Unión Europea, especialmente las familias más vulnerables, y de las que se está beneficiando Estados Unidos, especialmente su industria armamentística, su sector de energía y su sector primario. Las familias europeas, las más vulnerables, están pagando estas sanciones cada vez que echan combustible en el depósito de su coche, cada vez que pagan la factura de la electricidad o del gas, cada vez que no le llegan determinados suministros. En otro orden de cosas, creemos que hay que investigar todos los crímenes de guerra. Hay que investigarlos y hay que denunciarlos y hay que condenarlos. Pero todos los crímenes, los que están cometiendo el ejército ruso y los que están cometiendo las bandas nazis en Ucrania. Los linchamientos que están habiendo a civiles por el hecho de ser rusoparlantes. Los linchamientos que están habiendo a personas por ser gitanas. Eso también hay que investigarlo todo. Hay que investigar no solo en este conflicto. Nosotros somos partidarios de que se puedan investigar todos los crímenes de guerra. En cuanto a las armas, ¿somos conscientes de a dónde están yendo las armas que estamos enviando nosotros? Si alguna vez se consigue un alto el fuego, ¿quién va a desarmar a las bandas que están recibiendo esas armas ahora mismo? Porque tenemos experiencias de qué ha pasado en otros conflictos. Tenemos experiencia cómo las armas que se han enviado a Siria para combatir a Assad se están utilizando en atentados en otros terrenos. Les pido simplemente que reflexionen sobre esto, que no nos dejemos llevar por este calor belicista, porque desde luego estamos entrando en un escenario muy peligroso y me temo que irreversible. Muchas gracias.
This was the first round of speakers according to the to the group system, and I will now give the floor to colleagues according to the D'Hondt system and following the names noted by the Secretariat. And at the end, I will give the floor to Ukrainian guests. At the end, yes? If that's okay, Mr. Mayor. Miriam next man, and we will have to now reduce it to maximum 2 minutes, more 1.5 minutes if possible. Miriam next man first.
Thank you, Chair, for the floor, and thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to our Ukrainian guests to visit us. And I would like to express that we have to pay tribute to our Ukrainian colleagues and friends and to all Ukrainian people for fighting this unjust war, followed by appalling, inhuman atrocities against the civilians. And also our duty is to support Ukrainians as a moral duty, because we know that we haven't done our utmost to stop this while knowing that this can happen in the past. I'll come to the concrete questions regarding sanctions and the functioning and the way how they're efficient. I would like to ask our speakers, first of all, how the two task forces are efficient and effective, and if this is enough in order to monitor the efficiency of the sanctions. And also, I would like to ask in particular how we are monitoring that Belarus or other members of the Euro-Asian Economic Union area are helping Russia to circumvent the sanctions. Mr. Butikofer, the colleague Butikofer, also mentioned China. I would like to ask if the alleged information that Chinese Union Pay is helping to avoid and circumvent our financial sanctions, and also there were alleged information that Georgia is also helping to avoid sanctions, to help Russia to avoid sanctions, and I would like to ask if this information is being analyzed and if something is being done. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Next is Mr. Shimushevich.
Thank you, Chair. I fully agree with your description of the present situation. I mean, imposing of the sanctions was a political success because we were unanimous and we smoothly cooperated with our non-EU and non-European colleagues, friends, partners, allies, and so on. It will have political consequences, positive consequences in the future. However, as we all agree, it is not enough. I think that Putin will stop war only in two cases: if he wins or is defeated in the battlefield. And as we know now, there is a decisive battle taking place in Donbass. I wonder if we can do anything real, significant, in a short period of time of next couple of days. However, we should try. We should offer to our Ukrainian friends and allies much stronger support, including lethal weapons, able to inflict heavy casualties and heavy losses on Russian side. It is not a question of revenge. It is a question of limiting Putin's ability to continue fighting. This is the only way to stop that war. If he wins, we will have to guess who is going to be the next victim of aggressive Russia. Of course, we should also impose stronger economic sanctions, and I will not repeat what has been already said about imposing imports on hydrocarbons, especially oil. It is practically possible to be done in a relatively short period of time, should be done. But then, last thing, as it was also said by many speakers, Russian assets, Russian financial assets that have been located in the West have been frozen. They should be confiscated. Let's not leave any hope for Russian oligarchs, but also for Russian state, that there will be a moment in time when they will get it back. Those money should be, in majority, used for reconstruction of Ukraine in the future. Some of them can be used to compensate losses of European companies that withdraw from Russia. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Shimushevich. Next for the Renew Group, Bernard Guetta, 2 minutes.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Notre Parlement s'est honoré ces derniers jours ou semaines en appelant à un embargo total sur les fournitures de gaz, de charbon et de pétrole par la Russie. Nous devrions maintenant, me semble-t-il, nous saisir de 3 problèmes. Monsieur Timošević vient d'y faire allusion. C'est évidemment la livraison d'armes lourdes à l'Ukraine. L'Ukraine a besoin de ces armes. Le Parlement doit appeler à ce que les gouvernements nationaux les fournissent. Le deuxième point sur lequel nous devrions intervenir comme Parlement, c'est la nécessité d'une mutualisation, je dis bien d'une mutualisation des dommages causés aux économies nationales par les sanctions que nous prenons contre la Russie. Je pense notamment que nous devrions faire cette proposition en considérant l'ampleur des dommages que causerait l'embargo sur le gaz à l'économie allemande. Le troisième point sur lequel nous devrions intervenir rapidement, et c'est de loin le plus compliqué, c'est de dire clairement qu'il est évident que l'ouverture des négociations d'adhésion, non seulement avec l'Ukraine, mais avec la Géorgie et la Moldavie, provoque une situation complètement nouvelle dans l'Union européenne et que nous ne pouvons pas avancer, ce qu'il faut faire naturellement, mais que nous ne pouvons pas avancer dans cette direction sans commencer à totalement réinventer, et le mot n'est pas trop fort, l'Union européenne et ses institutions. Si nous ne le disons pas, si nous ne le faisons pas, je crains fort que la promesse faite à l'Ukraine, la Moldavie et la Géorgie ne soit alors de fausses promesses, ce qui ne doit pas être. Je vous remercie.
Thank you. Colleagues, I have 5 more speakers on my list. I will now close the speakers list. We have Andrius Kubilius, Thijs Ruiten, Rafael Glucksmann, Isabel Santos, and Mick Wallace. Juezas Olekas. I can't. Can you please tell us your name? Herr Fest. Okay. Herr Fest, Olekas. Okay, but we have to close the floor then. Next is Andrius Kubilius.
Well, thanks a lot, Mr. Chair. And thanks a lot for all who were speaking before, experts and representatives of different institutions. And, Mr. Chair, I have a question perhaps to you, Since really what we are speaking here, it's very clear that we are very much united in the Parliament. We passed resolutions on sanctions, we passed resolution on delivery of weapons, and that is a policy which we support from our heart. But also we understand, and that perhaps will be as a later discussion on your report, that EU decisions, especially on sanctions, on oil, what was said by Mr. Timošević, are stopped by some member states, which are still opposing or whatever, it's not very clear what do they have in mind. But we have very limited possibilities as a parliament to influence their decisions. And my question would be very simple. Should we start to, ask chancellors or prime ministers or presidents from those countries to come to the parliament and to explain why they are, not delivering what EU, institutions like European Parliament, like Commission, like, Chairman of the Council, Charles Michel, are asking to do. That would be our, really, influence, or at the end, our possibility to deliver, EU policy, which is so much needed. But all our efforts to speak to leaders of institutions, to Commission President, to Josep Borrell, are not. Giving any kind of additional benefit because they are on our side. Who is not on our side? Some government, some prime ministers, and we need to find a way what to do with that.
Thank you, Andreas. If you wish to invite member states representatives, you would have to ask the coordinators, and we can put this on the agenda of the next coordinators meeting, and if we agree, we can send invitations. But Thijs Ruiten is the next.
Thank you, Chair. And I feel humbled to sit here behind the representatives of the brave Ukrainian people on day 56 of Russia's bloody war of aggression. Any hope that member states might still be clinging on to for a negotiated settlement should have been shattered in the face of Bucha. The question now is, do we only protect our European values if it comes at no cost to us? And what are they worth if we fail to act when it matters? So this is not only an existential war for Ukraine, it's existential for our union. So let us give them all the help we can. We must do whatever it takes. So I want to see a council-wide commitment to send Ukraine all the heavy weapons it needs. And I applaud the member states who already did so. And we need an imposition of a full energy embargo. I really want to understand, and so I also ask, not accusing the representatives of the EAS and the European Commission here, because it's not their fault that it's not happening, but what happens when you impose a phasing out of coal by August? August! I mean, that is pathetic, and I'm really ashamed of that. The third thing we need is targeted sanctions to be taken far more seriously. Member states, including my own, allowed oligarchs to quickly move their assets by delaying sanctions enforcement for weeks. It's absolutely shameful. So my second question to the Commission is, can I expect the Commission to do far greater coordination of this? And can I expect the Commission to report on the implementation progress by Member States at the end of every week? I think that that is of the essence now. We share one goal, an undivided, peaceful and prosperous Ukraine within our European family. So I urge the Council, let's get to work. You have lost too much time already. Thank you.
Thank you, dear Thijs Roten. Raphael Glucksmann is next.
Merci, Président. Et j'aimerais d'abord rendre hommage à nos invités ukrainiens. C'est un honneur de vous accueillir et au moment où nous parlons, les résistants de Mariupol font face à une situation désespérée et je pense que le monde ne doit pas assister sans maudire et sans agir aux martyrs de Mariupol. J'ai vraiment l'intention de vous répéter ça, c'est que l'écrasante majorité de ce Parlement soutient l'Ukraine, soutient les livraisons d'armes lourdes à l'Ukraine et soutient l'embargo sur le gaz et le pétrole. Donc ne vous laissez pas distraire par des voix minoritaires dans cette salle. Mes questions à la Commission. Monsieur Shonka, vous travaillez sur la saisie des biens et des avoirs. Le gel n'est pas suffisant, comme ça a été dit. Est-ce que vous travaillez à la confiscation? Peut-on avoir des solutions en Europe pour que ces biens puissent ensuite bénéficier à l'Ukraine, aux Ukrainiens, à travers des fonds d'aide à l'Ukraine? À Monsieur Schmitt et à la DG Énergie, c'est évident que ce Parlement est d'une majorité écrasante pour l'embargo sur le pétrole et sur le gaz. Est-ce qu'il y a des études? La question vous a été posée, mais à mon avis, c'est extrêmement important de répondre. Est-ce qu'il y a des études que vous pouvez nous faire parvenir et que vous pouvez rendre publiques sur la manière dont on gérerait un tel embargo? Enfin, il y a eu un vote au Parlement européen pour autoriser l'augmentation des stocks, la constitution des stocks de manière urgente. Est-ce que vous faites la différence dans la constitution de ces stocks entre du gaz russe et du gaz non russe? Parce que si jamais nous nous précipitons tous pour acheter en masse du gaz russe en avance, en prévision de l'embargo, ça veut dire que nous payerons la machine de guerre de Vladimir Poutine en avance. Et donc, est-ce qu'il y a l'intention d'éviter ce qui serait une honte et complètement contre-productif?
Thank you, Mr. Glucksmann. Next is Herr Fest. Bitte sehr.
Vielen Dank. Vielleicht an die Kollegen. Ich bin persönlich auch für die Lieferung von selbst schweren Waffen an die Ukraine. Es ist bloß nicht so, dass man sich in einen Panzer setzt, in einen modernen westlichen Panzer und ihn bedienen kann. Die Ausbildung dauert mehrere Monate. Und ob das der Ukraine nutzt, möchte ich mal dahingestellt lassen. Aber das wissen Sie wahrscheinlich alle besser, weil Sie wahrscheinlich alle Militärexperten sind. Ich habe aber zwei Fragen an die Experten, die vorher hier sprachen. Eine schließt an das an, was Frau Loiseau sagte. Gibt es Folgeabschätzungen für ein umfassendes Gasembargo? Es gibt dazu einige Studien aus Deutschland, die sagen, dies würde eine Kernschmelze nicht nur für eine wirtschaftliche Kernschmelze nicht nur für Deutschland, sondern für den gesamten europäischen Wirtschaftsraum bedeuten. Dazu gibt es, wie gesagt, mehrere Studien. Ich würde gerne von der Kommission wissen, ob sie sich damit auch schon beschäftigt. Und dann gibt es ja auch europäische Länder, die von den im Augenblick sehr hohen Gas- und Ölpreisen profitieren. Gibt es hier eigentlich Gespräche mit diesen Ländern, ob nicht wie bei Covid auch hier eine gewisse Solidarität zu zeigen wäre, dass man nämlich diese Energiesachen an die anderen europäischen Länder zu den Preisen liefert, die vor dem Ukraine-Konflikt bestanden. Das wäre ein Zeichen der Solidarität. Und ich würde gerne wissen, ob es hierüber Verhandlungen gibt. Vielen Dank.
Danke, Herr Fest. Isabel Santos.
President, I switch to Portuguese. Há uma questão que é fundamental na abordagem do que vai acontecer nos próximos tempos, e espero que esta guerra acabe rapidamente. E tem a ver com isto, já foi aqui muito falado, a questão da recolha de provas, da preservação de provas, mas para que os crimes cometidos não caiam na mais completa impunidade, é preciso estudar a nossa capacidade de fazer com que os perpetradores destes crimes respondam diante dos tribunais. E é um crime, o crime de agressão, que está fora da alçada do TPI, do Tribunal Criminal Internacional, porque não há uma adesão ao Estatuto de Roma por parte da Ucrânia. E esse crime só foi previsto na Convenção de Kampala. Logo, a Ucrânia não estará abrangida nesse tipo de julgamento. Há a proposta da criação de um tribunal especial para o julgamento do crime de agressão. Eu gostaria de saber, por parte do Serviço de Ação Externa, como é que está a ser abordado o apoio da União Europeia à criação deste tribunal especial. A outra questão tem a ver exatamente com a energia, porque enquanto não acabarmos com o fornecimento de gás por parte da Rússia, não acabaremos seguramente com esta guerra. E eu gostaria de saber, porque há vários estudos a virem a público, a Direção-Geral de Energia aqui ainda não explicou qual é realmente o impacto, como é que estamos preparados para superar em conjunto, coletivamente, suportar o impacto por aqueles países que serão mais atingidos por este embargo e como é que vamos controlar possíveis ações de alguns países, e não é só a China, precisamos de falar também de outros países, nomeadamente a Índia, no suporte à Rússia, no contornar das sanções que estão a ser impostas. Como é que vamos controlar isto?
Our two last speakers are first Mick Wallace and then Uezas Ulekas.
Thanks very much, President. Having listened to the guest speakers, my first question to them is there any concern that the sanctions may be going to have a greater impact on the citizens of Europe than it will on the Russian government or its capacity to continue with the illegal invasion? My second question is, has there been any accurate estimate done of, in the case of the sixth phase of sanctions, in introducing an immediate embargo on all oil and gas from Russia, has there been any estimate done of the level of loss of jobs in Germany alone? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Uezas Ulekas.
Thank you, Chair. I will continue in Lithuanian. Aš sutinku su daugumos mano kolegų išsakyto mintim apie pagalbą ginklais, embargo sustiprinimą dėl energijos šaltinių ir aišku nesutinku su mano čia keletą kolegų, kurie lygina Rusijos ir Ukrainos karių veiksmus. sveikinu kolegas iš Ukrainos. Bet aš noriu pabrėžti 3 dalykus. Pirmas, mes turime laiko iki gegužės 9. Įsiklausykime į Putino spaudimą Rusijos agresoriam, daužyti, žudyti Ukrainos žmonės būtinai iki gegužės 9. Mes turime veikti dabar, ne rugpjūtį. Mes turime dabar įdiegti embargo, kad jis pajustų Rusiją. Mes turim dabar suteikti ne bet kokią ginkluotę, bet turim suteikti sunkėją, puolamąją ginkluotę. Mariupolis yra apsuptas ir jeigu norim, kad jis būtų atvertas ir išlaikytas, reikia sudaužyti ten esantį agresorių. Mes turime išvaduoti užimtas Harkovo, Donecko, Luhansko dalis, kad atlaikyti tą puolimą. Aš tik noriu kreiptis į išorinės mūsų veiksmų tarnybą, ar skatinamo šalys nariai suteikti tokią pagalbą. Ir trečias dalykas, vien Rusija embargo nepakanka. Lygiai tokia pati agresoriaus sąjungininkė yra Baltarusija. Mes matom kasdienius susitikimus, mes matom lėktuvų kilimus iš Baltarusijos teritorijos ir todėl turime pritaikyti lygiai taip pat ir Baltarusijai. Ačiū.
Thank you, dear colleagues, for all your contributions, your questions, your comments. Before I give the floor to our guest speakers, the experts from the Commission and the European External Action Service, I would now like to hand over to our Ukrainian friends and guests. And it's an honor now to give the floor to the mayor of Melitopol, Ivan Fedorov. Please, once again, a warm welcome, and the floor is yours, dear Ivan.
First of all, Mr. McAllister, dear deputies, it's a very great issue for me to be today here. And of course, I want to meet you again, but I don't take it in my mind that after 1 month when you met with you, the war started. And it's a very dangerous situation for not only for Ukraine, but for all civilian world now. Зараз я хотів би дуже стисло вам розказати свою історію. В 2014 році моя держава Україна та моє рідне місто Мелітополь зробили свій європейський вибір. І з нашою командою ми почали будувати островок Європи в нашому місті. Ми почали ремонтувати школи, дитячі садочки, медичні установи, будувати найкращі дороги, щоб дійсно наші жителі могли дійсно відчути покращення в нашому місті та в нашій державі. І найголовніше, що нам вдалося, це змінити свідомість людей. Вони дійсно почали відчувати себе європейським, демократичним, вільним народом. І відображення цього ми бачимо, коли під тиском, під дулами автоматів Російської Федерації в повністю окупованих містах півдня України багатотисячні мітинги та протести цивільних людей, не боячись, що вони будуть розстріляні, виходять на центральні площі та вулиці і кажуть: геть з наших міст, ми вам тут не раді. Чи не це є підтвердження того, що Україна дійсно змінилася і є європейською демократичною державою? Я не бачу вашого колегу, чи дійсно він вважає, що мене взяли в полон за мої радикальні фінансування радикальної партії України, яку я жодного разу не бачив та не чув? Чи дійсно він вважає, що нацизм в Україні є? Цього немає. Цього ніхто не бачить, крім російської пропаганди та вбивці Путіна. Сьогодні мрії мільйонів українців пошатнулися, тому що вони бачать, як тотально руйнуються міста, як вбиваються сотні цивільних дітей, тисячі цивільних громадян та тисячі військових. Сьогодні мрія і в Мелітополі також стає під великим питанням. Тому що ті нові школи, які ми побудували, з Мелітополя виїжджають вчителі. ті нові лікарні, які ми побудували, виїхала вже половина лікарів. Чи дійсно ми вважаємо, що це є нацисти, які від'їжджають з демократичних міст і європейських міст? Це точно не так. Найголовніше, що я хочу сказати, сьогодні в Україні не конфлікт. Це повноцінна війна. Війна не лише проти України, а війна проти всього цивілізованого світу, яку розв'язав Путін ще в 2014 році, а 24 лютого зробив повноцінну війну на території європейської України. Ми з вами маємо разом об'єднатися. Маємо разом об'єднатися навколо перемоги нашої держави. Тому що досить велика загроза, якщо ми цього вчасно не зробимо, війна прийде і до європейських держав, до європейських міст, до європейських домівок. Сьогодні ваш колега говорить про здатність жити в комфорті європейській сім'ї. Ви знаєте, в Україні сьогодні не думають жителі про комфорт. Вони думають про виживання. І це треба якомога швидше зупинити. Всіми можливими способами. Санкціями, тиском, зброєю, допомогою Збройної України. Всіми можливими та неможливими способами. Сьогодні українська нація – справжні герої. Наші солдати – справжні герої. Ми об'єднані так, як не були об'єднані ніколи. І ми точно разом з вашою допомогою переможемо Російську Федерацію. Дякую.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And now I give the floor to the member of the Verkhovna Rada, Maria Mezentseva. Please.
Colleagues, quite a historical day for me. Thank you, dear Chairman. I always remember being here as an expert lobbyist for Ukraine, stagiaire at every other capacity, but never thought I'll be here talking about the full-scale invasion. But I'll be less emotional than my colleague Ivan, but more technical as a representative of the European Integration Committee, together with which, and you, dear colleagues, in the newly established format, which Mr. Kubilas has proposed in a working group on sanctions, we review. Of course, we can debate whether within these 8 years of war the sanctions worked. Well, we are seeing the increase of cost of a daily life of Russians, and it means that they do work. We see that they are in need of the daily products which are absent. We see that the ministers are calling on production of daily things which were never been in the state budget plan. Of course, the oil and gas embargo is a very ambitious plan. We are coming from Rome just yesterday. We had meetings there. We are highly impressed by the decision of the Italian government. We think that many others have to follow, of course. Blocking the banks. Colleagues, SWIFT was in this house for so many times. We call for SWIFT. We call for SWIFT. SWIFT has only 6 banks. It doesn't have yet the biggest 2, who are also a part of these crimes, who are funding and preceding the assets, the monetary funds, for buying tanks, oil, and all the rest to proceed with the war. Disconnecting all the banks from SWIFT is definitely our goal. Blocking all the banks from access to European financial system is our mutual goal. Of course, colleagues, let's not forget about small things like blocking roaming, like technical things by blocking Russia Today and other channels, but they're not just all of them. There's another 8 which are remaining, and they're spreading alone the propaganda. So we do have issues in telecom as well. Of course, it's not last and not least, but cyber sanctions. And many colleagues have mentioned that the ban on the assets is essential. We have to understand what are the legal instruments of extracting these assets, freezing them, but more importantly, to sending them to a restoration fund, not only for Ukraine, but all partners who are supporting now us with your taxpayers' money. Individual sanctions, of course, will follow, but we know that the daughter of Putin wasn't found where she was residing. That's a question for the sharing of information, sharing of the personal information, and stopping all the citizens and all the individuals who are supporting the regime to stop enjoying the civilized world and the normal course of life. So sanctions do work. We can enhance them. We salute the next package of it. And on behalf of the government and parliament, we can still cooperate even more and at a bigger scale. My colleague Olena can elaborate a little bit more on technical issues. Thank you, dear Chairman.
Thank you, dear colleague. And now I give the floor to Ms. Olena Khomenko. She is the chair of the Subcommittee on External Economic Relations and Efficient Use of International Aid of the Verkhovna Rada. Also a warm welcome, dear colleague.
Dear colleagues, thank you for having us here today. With regard to sanctions, we would like to underline that all sanctions imposed with the connection of military aggression against Ukraine should also be imposed on Belarus. We would like to call on all member states to proceed with diplomatic isolation and limitation of Russian diplomatic staff in your countries, expelling Russia's ambassadors and continue expulsion of its diplomats from European Union and its member states, imposing a visa regime for holders of Russian diplomatic passports, blocking new visas and residency permits, and revoking existing ones for Russian officials and their families. Expulsion Russia from international organizations and associations and the closure of representative offices of key Russian companies abroad, as it was done by the Council of Europe, the first international organization which expelled Russia from the organization. We also need to close and ban Russian state-affiliated institutions, such as network of the Russian Centers of Science and Culture, because culture ties and culture connections are also as kind of weapon used by Russia. We are thankful to Venice Biennale for its clear position and for distancing from Russian delegation officials. However, there will be more attempts from Russian side to organize more cultural events, and they will try to bring their impact and spread disinformation and propaganda. We also would like to draw your attention that Russian channels are still operating in the territory of European member states. Sputnik and Russia Today is not enough to be blocked. There are more Russian channels which are spreading their disinformation through satellite providers in the European Union. Also, with regard to cyber sanctions, creating new sanctions against Russia for cyber crimes committed against Ukraine in view to prevent, deter, and respond to malicious cyber activities used by Russia's state bodies and Russia-led illegal hacking teams to undermine functioning of Ukraine's democratic institutions, financial and banking sectors, critical infrastructure, free and independent media. And last but not the least, and very important, is sanctioning is individual sanctions, sanctioning all officials and top state managers and their families who hold federal and regional positions and thus support barbaric regime and its crimes. It is also important to sanction so-called experts, influencers, bloggers, artists, and musicians, because they also contribute a lot into these criminal actions against Ukraine. Thank you, dear colleagues.
Thank you to all three guests from Ukraine for your very interesting words, and please let me reiterate our full solidarity with our Ukrainian friends in this dramatic moment, which is also a moment of truth for the entire Europe. Colleagues, we will begin our next item at 11:15 because we're running late, but now we have a bit more than 12 minutes left to hear some responses from our guest speakers. So many questions have been addressed. May I ask you to be as brief as possible? First, Mr. De Vigne. The most questions were to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to the honourable members for their questions. It was, of course, also very much enlightening to hear our Ukraine guest, whom we'll meet later on today as well. Let me just focus on the topic asked for around the ES, and since a number of questions were addressed actually more to my Commission colleagues. First of all, to Mr. Gahler, yes, Mr. Michel is indeed in Kiev. I think it's important as a sign of solidarity, but also a few weeks ahead the next European Council, that we show presence, as well as President von der Leyen, the High Representative, and others who have visited Kiev. Yes, the EPF, European Peace Facility, is well on its way. For obvious reasons to which Madame Loiseau has alluded, we do not give details in public on certain aspects of things, but yes, things are well on their way. On the international activities, several members have referred to the need to convince or to extend, to outreach to other countries to support us in our righteous, I would say, struggle for peace against this war. And you cannot imagine the activities that have been undertaken. The High Representative, numerous phone calls to ministers. It's really full-time activity. And it is not by chance that the results of the United Nations General Assembly, 2 resolutions, and third one expelling Russia from the Human Rights Committee of the United Nations have reached such high consensus, with 141 in favor, 35 abstentions, and only five, so Russia plus 4 allies. And that is clearly a sign of complete international isolation of Russia in this unjust war. I could add that Russia, the accession of CD has been stopped, that Russia has been expelled from Council of Europe, and a number of other international decisions. On the questions regarding the investigation war crimes by Madame Santos, yes, you have seen that the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court took part in the Foreign Affairs Council on 12 April with the Ukraine Prosecutor General. We, the European Union, are supporting through a reorientation of our advisory mission the collecting of evidence and helping the Ukraine Prosecutor General in collecting evidence of the numerous war crimes that have been committed and unfortunately that are being committed. And you have also seen the decision of International Criminal Court to open an investigation into Putin's invasion of Ukraine. So yes, the work is indeed being done. Last word for Mr. Pineda, who thought that we should end this belligerence. Well, Mr. Pineda, we are talking of a government of Russia which has denied during 8 years against all evidence to be involved in the Donbass war. 8 years of denegation, an outright lie. You should remember, Mr., that it takes 2 to make peace, but only, unfortunately, 1 to make war. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. De Vigne. Ms. Kopczynska, would you like to react to any questions and comments? That is not the case. Mr. Grassmann.
Very briefly, Mr. Chairman, just to make 2 or 3 points. to underline again the very high degree of coordination we have also in the area of financial sanctions, but sanctions more generally with member states, which goes well beyond the usual, let's say, approach. High degree of coordination, of course, this was also stressed by some other speakers with key allies, third countries, G7, but beyond, also those countries which play an important role in the international financial system. This works quite well.
Mr. Grassman, just a moment. Can somebody turn up the volume of the microphone, or could you speak a bit louder, Mr. Grassman?
Okay,
we can hardly hear
I
you.
try to be a bit louder. I will not repeat my first point. So, high degree of coordination works well, in particular with member states. Number two, just a word, circumvention in the area of financial sanctions is rather, as far as we can assess, limited. This applies, for example, also to the way crypto assets could be used. It was very heavily discussed, but if you look at the market realities, not so possible. That also applies to a possible circumvention of the use of international reserves. Again, as I said, a good part of international reserves of Russia are held in the European Union and also in other G7 countries. We see high compliance, full compliance of our ban on any transactions in these assets. And finally, third point I would like to make is, of course, we watch very closely also financial transactions of Russia with third countries as such, and as a possible way of circumvention. Of course, these financial channels are open, have been open, remain open. Beyond that, we haven't seen now a smoking gun yet, which would point to a widespread buildup of circumvention of these third country channels of our financial sector measures. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Grassman. Mr. Tsonka, would you like to comment on what you've heard?
Yes, thank you very much. Just 3 points very briefly. The first, there were questions about the amounts of frozen assets in the room, and we have published the figures last week, and the assets are close to 7 billion euros when it comes to designated individuals and companies. And that does not include the deposits of the Russian Central Bank. And there, the blocked transactions are close to 200 billion. So it's a much higher amount. And these figures are changing. So please do check the website where this is published. My colleagues in DG FISMA have a sanctions map, and the reporting is done by our national authorities into a special database called FSOR. The biggest challenge, I think somebody asked for the sanctions implementation, is indeed evasion or circumvention. And the key issue for circumvention is finding the beneficial owner. So the sooner our member states implement the registers of beneficial ownership, the easier it will be to find who is the ultimate physical owner of those assets. For now, I think many experts are seeing a multitude of companies and layers of front companies that hide the real ownership. So we need to get across this corporate veil before we get to the real owners. The third issue, I think the most difficult, is indeed how to confiscate those assets. And we are under the regime of the Fundamental Rights Charter, and the right to property is upheld by the European Union. So to get somebody's property confiscated, we need a crime. And we need a conviction in most of our member states of this crime. So we are looking for legal solutions. Money laundering embezzlement, perhaps sanction circumvention are such crimes for which we may confiscate eventually some of these assets. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schmidt, would you like to add something? Please go ahead. So, Mr. Schmidt?
Yes, I'm here. I'm trying to speak, but I'm not sure you can hear me.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
Okay, I'm pressing the button. Here we go. Okay, so in response to the various questions quickly, so we can say, like I announced before, that as part of the sixth package, that oil is certainly going to be part of that. We know that the impact of a far-reaching oil embargo would actually be massive on Russia, because Russia is the second largest oil exporter in the world after Saudi Arabia, and over half of those exports are going to the EU market, the so-called premium market. So it's around 45 billion euros in 2020. And we already see that today part of the Russian crude oil exports are being exported or being rerouted to so-called cheaper EU markets and being sold at a discount rate. So the Russians are already losing, in fact, even before the sanctions. In response to Mr. Loiseau and Mr. Wallace, of course, we do take into account the specificity of each member state, of the dependencies they have on Russian fossil fuels, and those are taken into account to avoid any disproportionate impacts when sanctions are being put in place. To Ms. Ceccardi, we are intensively reaching out to other energy-producing countries across the world, and this is not a secret. To Mr. Pineda, I think it's important to remind ourselves that the high energy costs are not something that started with the Russian invasion, but we already had that before because of the recovery out post-corona and the Repower EU communication, also the previous October communication, very much includes social measures and other measures to address SMEs and those who need help. So, for example, the RRPs, the recovery and resilience package, all member states to have flexibilities. To Mr. Reuten, I think the decision lies with the European Council, not with the Commission. So I think it's important to bear that in mind. And second last to Mr. Glucksmann, thanks very much for these very relevant questions. I think on stocks it's important to differentiate the fact that this storage obligation, of course, is not directly connected to the Repower EU package, but the obligation, of course, aims to have a strategic independence of Russian fossil fuels. And just the Repower EU plan actually is aiming at reducing our dependency on Russian export by 2/3 by the end of this year. So that in itself will have a massive effect already. To Ms. Santush, I think I already replied on the impact of the embargoes of the sanctions before, and it's actually, of course, not the direct competence of DG Energy to follow up, but I think my colleagues already replied on that. Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, we now come to the end of this item. I would like to thank all of you for this very interesting exchange of views on an important topic. Especially, I would like to thank our guest speakers from the External Action Service and the Commission. Colleagues, the Ukrainian government has handed to our EU ambassador in Kiev its replies to the questionnaire on membership sent by the Commission a few weeks ago. I believe politically this is very important. A very important moment for all of us in Europe, and I look forward to having an exchange of views with the Commission services on the accession process concerning Ukraine, but also Moldova and Georgia at one of the next meetings of our committee. And having carefully listened to all the arguments to this morning, I think I can say for a large majority of colleagues in this committee that we believe sanctions are the tool we have chosen in order to push Russia to stop its brutal war of aggression against Ukraine, but as things stand now, we have to conclude that they have not achieved their goal. Therefore, I would also like to call on the Commission and the Council to reflect thoroughly on why this has not been the case, so as to ensure that the next package will be the final one. We can now move on to the next item, that is item number 8, the report on the 2021 Commission report on Bosnia and Herzegovina.